Hi, today we have a beautiful guest, Dr. Andrew. No, I'm having it. Hold on a second. Give me just 1 second. So it's Dr. Andrew Shiller, also known as Dr. David Shiller, um,
You could
graduate.
say Andrew. You could say Andrew David Shiller. That's my full name,
Andrew David
and then
Shiller.
and then you could say like leave off the slave name part and just say or Dr. David or whatever that is. But like say
You know
Andrew.
what? You're a Harvard um, graduate, so let me give something for Harvard. They want to call you doctor, let them call you doctor. You know,
Wow.
but here we'll call you soul to soul. So we'll go that way. Go that way. So welcome to Coaching with Mendy, and it's beautiful to have you here. And we've been trying for a long time to get you on here, and the reason why I know we know each other from before, and somehow our souls are connected in a spiritual way. And I feel that it's something that the world can benefit in that what you offer and what resonates with me, and I would like to hear more about it, which I'm curious about. I know that you are a medical doctor, but you're also, I would say, a spiritual doctor, and you are combining, which is exactly what the Kabbalah teaches us, that the world is not only in medicine, the world is not only, meaning everything is under Hashem's world, and everything is connected, and that's the way you're healing people, which this definitely resonates to me. I'm not the medical doctor, but I am in the therapy line and in the coaching line and the somatic line, which I also try to use those methods meaning the spiritual methods, and to see and to resonate. So please tell us. I know that you have something which is called tikkun, and you have medication, and you're healing people, and we hear a lot about it. Tell us, bring out to the audience exactly what's going on over here. Are you
All
a
right.
rabbi? Are you a doctor? How do we bring these together?
I do get those questions. So I think the first thing to say is that I think you alluded to it. These things aren't separate. And modern medicine, even the science of medicine, the science that underlies medicine, is starting to evoke the profound interconnectivity of all the different parts of the body. So, whereas a lot of doctors are still kind of thinking about, okay, I'm a rheumatologist and I work on the immune system and the joints, or this person's a psychiatrist and he's thinking about the brain, and this person's a neurologist and he's focused on the nerves, and this person's a cardiologist, he focuses on the heart. But what we're seeing more and more that all of our chronic illnesses, all of the chronic challenging problems that are plaguing people, plaguing Western society, and especially the root of these difficult chronic syndromes that modern medicine just doesn't know what to do about, um, they have their root in the interaction of all the different biological systems. And so, for instance, the immune system is profoundly connected with the digestive system, and that's profoundly connected with the root core systems of the brain that decide whether the person feels safe or not safe. And all of that primes and shifts the function of immune system, for instance. We know that someone who's in chronic stress can have a more likely greater likelihood of having inflammation, and that chronic stress drives inflammation. We know that somebody who has an imbalanced function in their gut can get an inflammatory signal throughout their whole body. They can get it in their brain. They can develop arthritis. It can drive Alzheimer's disease. It can drive stroke and various other chronic illnesses. So all of our chronic illnesses are an outgrowth of what we're seeing as brain gut immune interactions. And the brain gut immune stuff is, well, that's what they're measuring now, right? But there's more to it because there's also research showing how all of that influences the way our cells function as individuals, the way our hormones function. We're starting to see that there's a subtlety to the way our body detoxifies itself. So all these biological systems are connected, but then we know that they're profoundly interconnected with our thoughts and our emotions and our perception. We know that people who have a greater sense of purpose, generosity, who live with more forgiveness and kindness, tend to do better when they have chronic health problems. They tend to live longer and have fewer issues in life. And so we're starting to see a whole other layer of interconnectivity where the mind, body, emotional aspect, maybe the body, the heart, the mind, are all connected to these biological variables. And like you mentioned before, the Torah system in Kabbalah talks about how, well, we've also got this higher soul, that we've got this inner soul, and that all of our biological variables and our emotional variables and our mind are still part of what you might call our ego structure. It's our embodied self. It's the person that we identify as who we are. And we're starting to see that, like, we have brain networks that they see on MRI scans that create that identity. And it's all within this embodied ego self, which they talk in some aspects of Torah as the animal soul, the embodied soul. But we also have what you might call a transcendent soul. And that transcendent soul is an incredible source not only of connection to higher purpose, but a deep sense of inner quiet and calm and joy, love that percolates through the whole system and has an incredible influence on all those biological systems. And so, you know, on a clinical level, without knowing all the science, a person who's sensitive, who's aware, who develops a certain right brain awareness and starts to perceive more subtle aspects of life and spirituality and understands that that's part of life. Yeah, we can see how it's important, it's relevant, and it shows up clinically. And so many people are starting to work in that way. And for me, part of what's really beautiful and astonishing is how modern science is starting to point in that direction. And like you probably know, Mendy, that there's this teaching in the Zohar, I think it is, which is one of the sort of ancient uh, holy books of our tradition, that talks about how
It's the secrets of the Torah, which is
secrets of the Torah,
secrets of
and
the
it
Torah.
it predicted that in like around the time of the Industrial Revolution, there'd be an upwelling of lower waters and a downflowing of upper waters. And the way that commonly gets understood is that the lower waters are the wisdom that comes from empiric measurement and living in the body, in the world. It's science, measuring all the physical variables. Science is becoming more and more subtle and nuanced and starting to see the interconnection on ever more subtle levels. And that's the lower waters rising up. And there's also going to be an outflowing of the upper waters flowing down, which is the inner teachings of Torah, which started becoming much more prominent with the Baal Shem Tov and his students and flowing into the world. And now it's everywhere. And we're starting to see these deep inner teachings that actually speak to and interact ever more closely and beautifully with the lower waters of science. And so to me, that's a very thrilling place to think and work because I've spent so much time learning the science of medicine and healing and also studying the inner Torah. So it's a
Right?
great fun and it's got clinical implications and benefit too.
And you just mentioned the Industrial Revolution and the Baal Shem Tov were both at the same time that they
Right,
came in.
right,
And so we see there's no ein bein mayim lamayim. There's no difference between waters and waters. There's that Gemara that tells us there's no difference, meaning to say exactly your work. Meaning to say you can do science, you're at Harvard University, but you're also taking a spirituality and saying, no, there is connected also to the body. And besides, like you mentioned before, there is the higher soul and the lower soul, which is, we say nafshis bahamas, nafshis alakis, which is, we have that. But on the other hand, who created the body? Who's the creator? And what
yeah,
does the creator want? So
right,
if it's the Torah, or it's the seven no-heady laws that non-Jews have to abide by, it's all connected. And noticing that all the spheres are connected to your limbs. The Arizal, which was the Kabbalist, the Talmud of actually Reb Chaim Vital has it in his Sefer Shar Kedusha, talking, and he was the disciple of the Arizal, teaching him all the parts of the body,
right,
what happens if you don't do, and if you don't,
right,
meaning to say, and it's sometimes it's a very sensitive topic because some people say, "Oh, it's that God with the baseball bat is going to hit you."
right,
No,
right,
it's
right,
it's it's not about punishment. It's about, you know, um, they call it cause and effect. There's certain things that, you're pressing certain buttons, you're causing certain things. If you're
Yeah.
gonna, drive a car and you're gonna put, the steering wheel the opposite direction, you're gonna go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
You're steering in the right direction, you're going in the right direction. So it's important to know because it's such a sensitive topic, and sometimes even it's again, you can't always tell it to a client, especially with somebody. I deal mainly a lot with mental health and with anxiety and that. And I hear the story, and again, when a person is not healthy, Hashem wants you, God wants you to be healthy first. And then you can talk to them about the Torah, whatever they need to do. But afterwards, you want to hear, okay, if you feel it's the right time, maybe you do this, maybe do like sometimes you hear in a spiritual realm, they're not connected. So what do you really expect? And it's very painful to watch. I'm sure you're experiencing that also sometimes. And when you know it's the right minute, maybe you can bring in a hair of that. The idea is first to heal the person. That is number one priority because
Yeah.
a person that is not healthy, again, it's hard to, you know, to keep the entire Torah, but you can do it step by step, step by step, step by step.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's but
Yeah, it's well said. And I think just to sort of elaborate on that a little bit, the way I think of it is that um, many people, regardless of where they grew up, whether they're in a religious context or a non-religious context, if they grow up with too much judgment and too much harshness and negativity, then judgment's hard to handle and it can become painful and retriggering for someone. A lot of my patients come to me with chronic stuff and they've had a lot of childhood trauma or trauma at certain points in their life. And there's a certain protection of the self that's there, right? Like the source of life built inside of us, these incredible protective responses that are there to perceive danger and help us get away from danger. And those show up throughout our body, throughout our physiology, right? The stress response of the body is a protective response. It mobilizes to help us perceive and be vigilant and avoid danger. And that operates on the level of our immune system, which is also like a protective response. And they work together. But then there's also the sort of mental patterning. And so we all know people, maybe ourselves, who grew up with a lot of harsh judgment or even trauma and walk through life with a lot of vigilance for anything that smells like those once dangerous experiences they may have had. We have an aspect of our brain. It's called the reticular activating system. And what does it do? It it encodes our awareness and our attention. It causes us to look for certain things. Like we walk down the street, we see so many trillions of bits of information. A lot of it we don't really see. Our eyeballs see it. It goes to our brain, but the part of our brain helps us not perceive the stuff we think we don't need to see and look at the stuff we think we do need to see. And it's amazing how conditioned it is. So, like a lot of people, if you start thinking about maybe you're going to buy a certain kind of car or take a trip someplace, or you start thinking about something new, and then before you know it, wherever you go, you're seeing it. Well, like, wasn't it there before? Like, yeah, it was there before, but because the mind wasn't primed, you don't see it. So this is kind of a long explanation, but the whole idea is we get conditioned to look out for certain kinds of experiences. And for someone who grew up with a lot of judgments, you're wrong, you're bad, you're horrible, all the kind of things that a person hears, unfortunately, sometimes, God forbid, in kind of an abusive environment, giving them rules is not a path to healing. And so for a lot of people, Torah and religion is rules. Do this, don't do that. Do this and you'll be praised or rewarded. Don't do that to be like that becomes so hard to even relate to. And as you know, it's not even what we really need in that moment. And so, my approach to spirituality when I'm working with people who are Jewish or non-Jewish is like, let's find that quiet point inside that connects us to the source of life. And that's the language in Torah. We call it devekut, from this word devik, which is like glue. And it really means attaching ourselves to that inner point. We all have an inner point that's quiet and clear. And, maybe a person's experienced that when they like went to a beautiful classical concert and the music just touched them, or something in nature, or like the Grand Canyon, or maybe it was a psychedelic trip. Someone wakes up to like, wow. And this has been measured. There's science that's looked at the commonalities of spiritual experience and found things like a sense of knowing, a sense that the ego separate sense is getting sort of softer. Then there's emotional qualities like love and awe and wonder. There's frequently like a sense of connection to everything. And so various techniques that just help a person start to touch that experience without a lot of conditioning, without a lot of boundaries or rules, but just like depending on what it is, with the breathing, with attention to certain emotional qualities, movement, breath work, intention. There's various tools for connecting the mind to that place that's expansive. And as you know, one of the famous sayings from the Baal Shem Tov, one of these great sages of Torah and Chassidut, was that wherever a person puts their mind, there they are. And so what I think I witnessed very early on in my career and didn't know what to do with it was seeing people where is their mind? I'm broken. What's wrong with me? I'm sick. I'm in pain. And what am I going to do about this and that and that? And it's like in the worry. And the worry begets more worry. And the part of the mind that is conditioned to look for stuff gets driven by the stress response and driven by that sense of vigilance and danger. So the person's mind and intention is just wrapped in all of the negative stuff in life. And they're perceiving more negative stuff in life. So it's like a vicious cycle because on the biological level, that turns on the biology of danger signaling that goes to the immune system, that goes to the cells, that goes to the heart and the brain and the lungs and creates chronic illness. And so, there's a lot out there that you know of about like neuroregulation and neurohacking and vagal hacking. It's a big thing out in the blogosphere. And people have all these techniques of breathing and of, cold plunge and various things to turn on vagal tone in a neurologic way. And that helps a lot of people. But what amazes to me is how many people come to me and say, well, I try to do that breathing and I just can't because and they just can't, so they don't. But when we unpack and I ask them, well, what happened? Let's do it together. Tell me what happened. And they'll say things like, well, I was wondering if I was doing it right, and I was thinking I was doing it wrong, and I was trying to relax and I was getting more tense, and all these other things that you've probably heard from people. And it's a constellation of things, and that's the stress response. That's the hypervigilance. That's that default mode network, which is constantly going, how am I doing? Am I okay? How am I doing? Am I okay? And so when a person starts to touch that transcendent self, that expansive self, then the default mode network quiets down, and they show that in the research. And then hypervigilance quiets down. And the neurology, the neurologic signaling that's driving all of that hypervigilance quiets down. And then like, whoa, things start to relax. And then things start to open up. And then it's like a new experience for the person because they're touching like, wow, I just touched calm. It's been so long. It's very healing.
The,
As you
the hardest part is in the beginning, like you mentioned, especially in breathwork, which I do a lot, and where there's times, yeah, they basically have expectations or they have anxiety. I'm doing it right. I'm not doing it right.
right,
And when
right,
you tell them to just surrender, let go, just get into your breath and just think who gave you breath and where it's coming from,
right,
sometimes people have a very hard time to get to that space.
right, right, right.
How do you handle something like that when somebody has that, I
So, right.
cannot
No,
let go?
I totally get it, right? The because all those protective responses, physically, emotionally, mentally, are just right. So there's a few things I like to share with people. And one of the most powerful ones is don't try to relax and don't try to make it better. Somebody came to me not long ago. She's a lovely woman in her 70s. She started having back pain. It was making it harder for her to walk. She used to walk to visit her kids who didn't live so far away, but she couldn't anymore. She was feeling more and more isolated. So like she couldn't walk, she couldn't get around. She was starting to feel anxious. How am I gonna I'm gonna be so lonely? She had a whole thing going. And she'd gone to a psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist was trying to teach her some mindfulness and some breathing techniques. She's like, it doesn't work. It makes me. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing is Just stop trying to make your anxiety go away. She's like, what do you mean? I want to make it go away. I'm like, yeah, but when you try to make anxiety go away, who's wanting it to go away? The person who's anxious. So start by not being a person who's anxious and realize that anxiety is a gift to you from the source of life. God gave us anxiety to help protect us. It's a little overactive, but you don't have to be afraid of it. She's like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of my anxiety. It was like a big novel idea. It was a chiddush for her. And then from there going to like when you're doing whatever technique it is, stop trying to make anything happen. You're not trying to get anywhere. What I like to tell people is like there's a part of you that's never been sick and it's never been traumatized and it's never been afraid. And it's inside of you. And you can't make yourself see it, but you can fall into it by accident. So I try to prepare people with that kind of mindset of not struggling and giving them practical, concrete things based on their experience. Like, hey, what are you experiencing? Oh, I get anxious when I try to relax. Okay, don't worry about it being anxious. Don't worry about relaxing. Just drop the whole thing and let's do the technique. Right. And so, one of the things that I often do when people in that situation, I mean, the same experience multiple times with people who had some kind of pain. They learned to do some sort of breathing technique and they couldn't breathe through it. And I'm like, breathe through it? And he's like, yeah, breathe and get the pain to relax and get my stomach to feel better. Like, no, don't breathe away. Don't try to make it go away. But how about this? Just become aware of what your breathing feels like and just notice the sensations like you're sitting on a beautiful, comfortable chair in a meadow by the sea and there's nothing for you to do. You're so calm. It's like the most calm place you've ever been. And you're just noticing the sensations of your own breathing as if you're watching a movie of your own breathing. And so like they'll play with that and then maybe depending on the situation and like imagine if you were a little boy or a little girl sitting by the sea with a safe adult and see the waves rolling in and like they're just so effortless and they just keep coming and you might notice that the waves like the ocean is big, they're coming from really far away and the sand is not trying to make the waves be anything in particular. The wave comes in when it wants, it rolls out when it wants. And so just noticing that your own breathing is like those waves. And then as they start easing into that, and just like the ocean is vast and you know the source of life has been breathing you since before you were born, and every breath you've taken has been a gift from the source of life, and just appreciating that since before you've been born, this source of life has been breathing you. And if it's a person who knows Torah, I'll just remind them of the pasuk of Hashem Elokim Nifach Ruach Chaim, that the the source, the power of everything, breathed the breath of life into the first human, and that the sages tell us that process is happening all the time. So right now, the source of life is breathing you, and letting yourself be breathed by that source of life. And that often just shifts them into a different perspective. I tend to reinforce the notion of effortlessness, right? Like God's breathing you and there's nothing you need to do. And the holy four letters that we know as the name of God, that represents love. And so it's the source of love and it's been breathing you from love forever. And everybody has a little nakuda where they know what love is. So they start to like, they feel that a little bit. And, the process goes on in response to the person. And that's one technique. There's another one I often use when people are very uncomfortable paying attention to their breathing, because many people are. Should I describe that? Or we could talk about something else, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, that's nice. Like, getting back also to you were mentioning about the Shem Tov, wherever your thoughts are, that's where you are.
Yeah.
Um, what I'm noticing, I practice as well hypnosis and
Mm.
learned the science of hypnosis, and that's what you said before,
Yeah.
talking about imagination. The work in hypnosis is we
Yeah.
call something in the brain which is called a critical factor, which happens later in life.
Mm.
That critical factor is blocking you.
Mm.
So what happens is what's my job as a hypnotist to help the person is
Mm,
to bring in a new imagination, meaning to say
mm,
everything that the reason why you're stuck is because of imagination, or the sickness is because of imagination, or the addiction is because of imagination.
mm,
Even and the very important part is that the imagination is in the subconscious mind and the willpower is in the conscious mind.
right.
Imagination is 1,000 times stronger than the willpower.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Right.
that's such a and that's exactly what well because actually we talk about the Baal Shem Tov, but as you know that today is the Orach Chaim HaKadosh Siyartzeit, the memorial,
Mm, hmm.
and exactly the way he was sensing, he always wanted to meet him. So he lived in Ukraine in
Right.
Mezhevitz,
Right.
and the Orach Chaim Kodesh at that time already came up to Israel,
Right.
there to Israel. And he wanted to meet him, and there was a whole story. He couldn't get to him. Hashem actually didn't want them to meet because if they would have met, they could have bring Mashiach, and that wasn't the time.
Right.
But when
Right.
he passed away, when the Racham Kodesh passed away, the the Baal Shem Tov, which was in Mezhbitz, sensed, and it says, "Oh, the light in the west." He said, "Kovaner Meravi," but
Mm,
that it distinguished. He
mm,
sensed it, and
mm.
it's a matter of because he was so connected to him, and they were so
Yeah.
soul to soul.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So it should be, in his merit, or everybody needs healing, and listens to this should have healing just in the merit of the Rechaim Kodesh, which is today is his
Amen.
memorial. I would
Amen.
like to know if you can give us an example of healing that somebody came to you with an illness and through spiritual parts that the healing came in.
Yeah. So, so the work I do is mainly with people who have chronic problems, chronic digestive problems, chronic pain. Um, some people who've got autoimmune disease, who've got um, who are sick and they're not well. And when you say healing, like healing can mean, wow, the person's problems completely went away and they're completely back to normal. I don't see that much. Maybe that's because I'm, just a regular person and not a huge holy man. But what I do see is that when we bring in the inner work, the situation pivots and changes significantly, and it opens the process of healing because the person accesses a deeper level of who they are. And so a few people I've seen who have chronic digestive problems, we're talking like belly pain and needing to go to the bathroom, and they can't even leave the house because they're going all the time. And there's a really well-known connection between the mind, stress response, and the nerves of the gut and the function of the gut. And it's a huge driver of that. And a lot of those folks have done other stuff, like I mentioned before. And they've tried to do breath work, or they've tried to do mindfulness, and they're doing it within that struggling self, right? The part that's not okay and doesn't feel okay, who's trying and struggling to be okay. And they're in a place of struggling, not in a place of allowing, not in a place of trusting. And so when we go in and up and we touch a higher place that's quieter, that's more, I wouldn't even say calm because it's like to call the neshama, the inner soul, calm. Well, it's beyond calm. It's just existence. It's beingness. And so just touching that already has made a huge impact for a lot of people. But then there's another piece that I've found really useful, and it's connected to the notion of imagination and hypnosis. And so, for instance, one of the folks who I saw who had a lot of this abdominal pain, I'll ask people for what's the image of their illness when they're in it. Like, okay, let's close your eyes. We'll go to an elevated place. We'll get to some calm. And so going into the place where you're feeling uncomfortable in your body and noticing what you see. What does it look like with your eyes closed? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Is there some sort of dynamic image going on? And so, for instance, one of these people who had a whole lot of really bad abdominal pain, he saw in his belly this like knot of like wire and barbed wire, and it was like just ugly, black, gray, like angst. And so like, okay, hold that and just be with that. And like, let's go now in and up and just meet your breathing and realizing that, that God's breathing you. And from there, ask for a healing image. And he came up with an image that was like a beautiful waterfall of like blue-green water flowing down into his stomach. And it just completely washed away all of that pain. And what I appreciate about that approach, that I use that a lot with other situations, it's the person's own image, right? And so like with this, we have this understanding, as you know, that the aspect of our soul that contains our imagination, Olam Yetzira, the Ruach, sits right between the higher soul, the Neshama, and the embodied soul, the Nefesh. And so the imagination can be drawn after the embodied soul, and that tends to be the pain, the distress, the sense of I'm broken, I'm sick, I'll never get better, whatever all that stuff is. And that's generating image all the time. And as I understand it, that's what you were talking about before around like your imagination is what makes and keeps you sick. And so what I aim to do with people is touch that, see that, recognize that, but then let's go in and up to the higher place and ask it for an image and let that image work and percolate. And part of what I love about that is that I'm able to tell the person, like, you came up with that image, not me. All I did was direct your attention. And it's a way of giving their agency back to them. Because one of the biggest challenges is that people feel so disempowered. And our culture feeds into that. And we get used to this idea that we need to find the expert, whether it's the Rebbe or the right online guru or the teacher or whoever it is. And really, every one of us has inside of us a pharmacy. We've got inside us a deep, knowing, healing space. And so I'm constantly thinking about, well, how do I help people access that more effectively so that it's not about me? I'm not healing them. I'm just trying to direct their attention and direct the kohot nefesh, the powers of the human body and mind and soul, to sort of like, let's find the pathway together.
How long does it take for a person, like in one session, or how long is a session in order to get them to that space to notice? I like the way you said it. Everybody has a pharmacy within them.
Right. Right.
Like in order to get to that recognition and to know what's going on, like how long does it usually take for someone to get there?
I don't I don't even think about that question very much, to tell you the truth. I know it's normal to think and wonder. And it's like some people are much more open and connected. They've done all this work and they just need a little bit. And some people are really bound up in all of their stuff and it takes them longer. So it really depends on the person. And I feel like, how it is like there's a part of our brain that wants to know how long, how hard, where, how much, like we're asking all
No, I'm
those hard
asking it
questions.
from your experience. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I can even give an answer to that because I'm not really tracking it. I kind of go into the moment with people, and there's people that I work with a little, and there's people that I work with more. Like it's my sense of it is that it's not a simple thing to just all of a sudden think, oh yeah, I'm going to do this meditation once, then everything's going to change. If my body and my mind has spent 20 or 50 years practicing it, so to speak. Because, the other thing we know from the scientific point of view is that we have this neural network process, right? We know what neural networks are. They're like all of the learning that our brain does, all of the learning that your immune system does, and your cardiovascular system. It's constantly learning through neurologic connections. Somebody who's an athlete who goes out and trains their heart and they build their capacity. What they're doing is they're building these neural networks that are allowing the heart and the muscle. They're building the muscle. They're building all the different aspects of the tissue, but a lot of it's neurologic conditioning that allows the heart to, run 10 miles or whatever it is. Likewise, when someone has a traumatic experience, or they get really sick and then they start to get, blood sugar dysregulation, and they start to develop diabetes and they start gaining weight. That's also a neurologic processing learning process. And all of those biological processes that are happening through learning neural networks, working with all the organs, are also interacting with like the person's self-image and their understanding of themselves. And they're becoming more and more invested in that image of I'm sick, I've got diabetes, I need to stop eating, I can't stop eating, I need to stop smoking, I can't stop smoking. Whatever conflicts and all those things, like it can be a lot of layers. And so, like I do a kind of intensive program with people who are in health crisis, and I recommend we work together once a week for 3 to 6 months to really start, working the process, understanding it, unpacking it, getting the lay of the land, and starting to learn the mindset pieces, the perceptions, how to believe and how to think about it, and then the inner practices, the spiritual practices, and how to like do that regularly and accountability so that they do it and practice it to rework it. You look out there in the mainstream world, and all the sort of like leaders who are talking about behavioral change and mind body stuff, Joe Dispenza, Tony Robbins, you know they do these intensive sessions with people over days or a week, but then a big part of it is like follow up and follow through. And if you look at all the best sort of, there's some really great like vagal tone brain retraining programs like Gupta and DNRS and things that have been developed by professionals to help people with chronic illness. And it's really about reworking the stress pathways and danger pathways and those neural networks. And, it's over weeks and months if you really want to make significant change. And of course, if somebody goes into an environment that is just powerful, powerful, intense, like you and I were together at an elevation seminar in Mexico with Rabbi Daniel Katz, who's like a master at guiding an audience, and he brought 300 people or whatever it was into this incredibly high state of consciousness. And there were people who had major shifts there who like wrote to us after talking about like, yeah, this is just different in my life and it continues to be different. But that's from spending 4 or 5 days in a group environment with group awareness and consciousness. You talked before about the Baal Shem Tov being connected to Or HaChaim, and the concept we know is like hit kashrut, that like souls are non-local. We can connect to souls. And so 300 people who are being trained and taught. Let's all connect together and to connect to the source of life and get to a higher place. Like big things can happen. So
That was
it's so
also
dep
that was also part
what's
of
that?
that was
What?
this is also part of the Torah's Abel Shem Tov. He
Yeah.
said that you should gather together and
Uh-huh.
work in
Oh, with the
collective.
chavraya. Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure. 100%.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which there is a power from the collective, and in general, we see it in science also. Like there's certain, what do they say? Like your breath makes the butterfly in the other side world to grow and things. So we're seeing that's the nature of the world,
Yeah,
how Hashem created the world. This is the mechanism. This is
right,
the mechanism.
right.
Beautiful. What would you just recommend for people on a daily basis to do and to connect and to be healthy?
Sure. Well, I mean, I tend to think in three different kind of, imagine three circles connected to each other like a Venn diagram where they're intersecting. And this is just a mnemonic I worked with for a long time. And we've got our, what you might call, I call it 3 M's, right? We've got metabolic or biochemical variables, and that's your nutrition and digestion and what you eat and what you're exposed to. You've got your um, mechanical structural variables, your movement system, your muscles, your joints, your nerves, your bones, and then you've got your mind-body system. And those are all interconnected with each other. And like we were talking about before, all of that's within the kind of the embodied soul. And then you've got this transcendent self that's beyond all of that, that goes up, right? And so my sense is that it's important for us to pay attention to all three of those three circles, the three M's, and then the transpersonal part. And so, for instance, like I live in Israel, and there's this road near Beit Shemesh. It's like a highway that goes along, and there's a big median in the middle, but it's not that big. Maybe it's like, I don't know, 50 feet wide. And people jog along that, right? And it's like, okay, great, you're jogging. Exercise is good, but you're also breathing in car exhaust. And that's a major stressor to the immune system and the detox system and the cellular system of the body. So it's like we have to think about the big picture and understand the interconnectivity of things. And so, one great example of what not to do is like people decide, oh, maybe I'm gluten sensitive. So they go out and they buy gluten-free products. And as you know, a lot of those gluten-free products are made of all these like chemical processed like crazy stuff because they want it to taste like nice bread and cake. But meanwhile, it's full of all this stuff that creates another pathway of generating immune reactivity or cellular stress. So, a person has to be willing, if they really want to live for longevity and well-being, to heal chronic illness. We have to think about it as part of our avoda and be willing to learn and grow. And that can be hard for people, just acknowledging that. Um, learning to eat in a way that's less inflammatory. A lot of our frum brothers and sisters eat a lot of brown food, right? Like we used to joke as coming back into Torah, Ashkenazi brown food. It's cholent and it's bread and it's kugel and it's brown food. And like, what is brown food? Well, brown food is when you take simple carbohydrates and you cook them at high temperature, often with fat, and it creates that crispiness that tastes so good and it's so geschmack, right? But it's really reactive stuff that like makes your body sick. And so it depends where someone's living, where are they holding? If someone's like eating cholent and kugel and like white bread every day and they cut that in half and they substitute with some fresh salad or maybe some healthy fish or things that are actually positive, low inflammatory foods, vegetables that are full of all the colorful stuff that actually fights inflammation, then they're making a step in a great direction. And so I think everybody should like think about where they are and what's the small step they can make. And so maybe that means um, for one person where their diet's already pretty good, they might have to go to a much higher level than someone who's eating at a really low level. And so having a lot of compassion on ourselves, realizing that, okay, I came to this point in my life and I'm eating this kind of food and I don't do any exercise and I have lots of stress. If I all of a sudden decide I need to change that and make myself perfect, then I'm just beating myself up and I'm not going to get anywhere. And so compassion and the right kind of chevra, the right kind of teacher, maybe the right kind of coach who can be gentle, who can support incremental change and celebrate it. Because that's another part of this is like, how do we make positive change? We have to decide. We need a kavana, which is an intention with emotion behind it. We need ratzon, which is like a tsinor, as you know. It's like desire. And so, and then we need a way to measure it, like smart goals, like coaches love to talk about, things that are attainable, that you can measure, that are time bound. Like, okay, in the next week, I'm only going to eat red meat once because I'm eating it 4 times a week and I want to cut down my red meat as one example. So I hope that's making sense. It's like there's so
Definitely.
much, yeah, there's so much to it that it's hard to say, you
And
know, wow.
this is the part of the Nafshisa Bahamas, which meaning is the And how do we, but we were talking, how do we bring in now the nafshelekus, which is the godly soul? This was the
Yeah,
animal soul. So we need
yeah,
to bring it
yeah.
together.
100%. Yeah. And, I want to speak to that because in my own life, I grew up living a normal American diet. And, I started to do more meditation practice and quiet. This is before I was even religious, but I was just quieting, spending time in nature, solitude, I was healing my nefesh just through quiet. And through doing that, I found myself just being attracted to eating things that were healthier. It was very organic. And it's like the Rambam in Shmoni Prakim, the 8 chapters from the Maimonides, where he talks about building health of both the sort of animated soul that's in the body, as well as the mind and the body itself. And like, if my nefesh is sick, if I'm full of pain, hatred, ignorance, confusion, self-judgment, fear, then the choices I make in my life are likely to reflect that. And so that kind of gets into bringing all these worlds together and starting to heal that mind body connection. And so one level of healing the mind body connection is working on stress. But then there's this other level, like we've been talking about for most of this conversation, which is touching that higher level of soul, if we can, in a way that's meaningful and relevant to us at the time, that kind of brings that sense of like, oh, wow, I just met a part of me that's not sick. And people meet that part, and it's like, it's very dramatic. So there's the mind body piece, calming, healing emotional trauma, emotional pain, getting the mindset straight with whatever your values are, starting to connect to a higher self, a higher source, the source. There's the sort of metabolic biological food stuff. I want to say 3 things about that because we do know a few klalim, general principles that are really important. One of the most important things in medical research about enhancing health and long-term longevity is eating less. Like that's the most research points to that. There's other research talking about various diets and Mediterranean diet and fasting diet, all these different things that people are doing in keto or whatever. Those are newer and less researched, and there's some promising things there about intermittent fasting. Keto can be dramatic and make a big difference depending on a person in shifting something potent and powerful by shifting the way the body metabolizes stuff. But in terms of long-term well-being and the most research, less food. Less food helps, right? And that's one thing. And the other thing is less processed food, simpler, natural, healthy food, like the kind of food your grandparents used to eat, or, modified with modern sensibilities, depending if your grandparents were living in a place where they just ate potatoes and chicken,
Yeah.
vegetables, all that kind of stuff. Colorful fruits and vegetables, we call them polyphenols. Polyphenols are the colored molecules that make blueberries blue and apples red and pomegranates red and oranges orange and so on and so on. And those are powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory compounds, and getting a lot of those is good. So that's 2 of the worlds. The third one that I really want to mention, this third M, which is that motor structural system, is physical activity is amazing for health and well-being. And someone who sits at a desk all day, we're seeing like in research, just getting up every hour and a half for 2 minutes, just like walk down the hall and then sit back down. You're sending a signal. You're telling your body, I'm an active being, not a sedentary being. And that shifts metabolism in a favorable way. Of course, it's also good to do more intensive exercise according to what your nature is. And, somebody who's just starting needs to start slow and build from there. You don't
Mhm.
all of a sudden go out and run. I know people like this. Like, I haven't exercised ever, and I ran 6 kilometers, and I felt horrible. Like, why did you run so far? Start with like half a kilometer, Get used to it, build up from there.
Build
Make
up.
sure you don't hurt yourself. We know, for instance, like when you stretch the connective tissue of the body, which wraps around all your muscles, connects your muscles to your bones and joints, stretching connective tissue reduces inflammation. Somebody who's got inflamed joints, stretching gently, appropriately, not overdoing it. Somebody who's got any inflammatory disorder, that could be part of why we're seeing that movement and stretching activities along with breathing and relaxation, which a lot of the modern movement arts that people are doing combine those together, whether it's Pilates or other things. They have a lot of positive health benefits. So, this could be a long, long conversation about what's the best thing to do.
Yeah. As far as emotional health, you were mentioning some people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important to be aware of your emotional health. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong, but we all are going through on a daily basis
Right. Right.
emotional situations. Correct?
Yeah. 100%.
What would you recommend in that?
I think the first thing to remember is that we have emotions for a reason, and they're not necessarily bad. A lot of people who are the most sort of struggling with emotional health, part of what's going on is they don't want to acknowledge it because they've been taught it's not okay to have bad emotions. They're supposed to be happy all the time. Western culture is famous for having this sickness of like, we need to be happy all the time. Doctor, I've been unhappy 4 times in the past week. Have you got something for me? And so it's this crazy sickness of thinking we need to be perfect. And we don't need to be perfect. We're allowed to have sadness and fear and grief. And this is a big one for like Torah people. We're allowed to experience anger. Like my understanding of it is the Torah says a lot about like Hashem says, I can't live with an angry person. And anger is avodah zarah, it's idol worship and all these things. My sense of it, that's talking about someone who that's their identity. They're an angry person and they're living angry all the time. But if someone is in the process of some sort of emotional healing or being aware of what's going on inside, and part of what comes up is anger because they've been hurt or abused or taken advantage of, like, okay, you don't necessarily act out that anger, but to recognize that there's anger and to accept that there's anger and it's there to teach you something. And anger is typically what we like to call a secondary emotion. It's a powerful emotion. Whereas sadness or vulnerability or fear is a less powerful emotion. It's an emotion of weakness that tends to be disempowering. So frequently anger comes in to give the person a sense of agency. So, okay, use that, right? And acknowledge it's okay to have negative emotions. There's a beautiful piece, like you probably learned it already, but in the Moranayim, where he's talking about the whole notion that we're always going up and coming down. Ratzov v'shov. We have an expansive, beautiful, connective moment. We have a moment where we come back, we're meeting difficult stuff. In that difficult moment, we might meet difficult emotions. But remembering that those emotions are a kind of energy, a kind of aliveness, and they're all coming from the source of aliveness, the Chai HaChaim, the life of all lives. And so when you feel a negative emotion, remembering God gave this to me. There's an aspect of God in this emotion. How can I work with it constructively? And the way I understand that for the Torah people out there is like that's part of revealing Hashem through our emotional experience, revealing Hashem through our negative emotions, recognizing that God is part of that, and that's what parts of what starts to transform it. Because typically, if I have a pattern of emotional pain, and maybe it's sadness and it's colored with anger, and there may be some fear, and it's a habit and it came from some hurt or wound that I had, we know that inside that wound there's a nakuda of neshama. There's a point of the godly soul in it. And when you start to unpack that knot, that klipa, when you start to meet those difficult emotions and bring awareness to it, then you start to meet that aliveness and energy that's actually part of your own divine soul. And you start to release it and you start to elevate that whole experience. And, you know, I just want to share two small other things here. This is something that's been researched, like it's in the psychological literature, and there's something that's called affective labeling, right? Affective labeling means, oh, identifying the emotion. I'm experiencing fear. I'm experiencing sadness. I'm experiencing loss. Feeling it, but not getting sucked into it, just touching it. when a person does that, it changes the activation of the brain. We have a part of the brain that's called the amygdala. That's like the fight, flight, freeze alarm
Rep-
response. We got a
Reptilian
part of
brain.
Yeah, we got a part of the brain that's the left prefrontal cortex. And that's the part that's like planning, activation, like, okay, I'm feeling something hard, but I'm here and I know I gotta go to work, I gotta take care of my child, or I need to do what I have to do. I'll carry the pain with me, but I'm gonna do it anyhow, you know? And so affective labeling leads to a turning down of the intensity of the amygdala, the emotional response, and a turning up of that prefrontal cortex, which is like, I can do it. I'm still here. Because what I see a lot is that a person might say, I'm sad, I'm afraid, I'm angry, which is very different than I'm experiencing sadness, I'm experiencing fear. In one case, I'm inside of it and it's me. I'm identifying with that negative emotion. In the other case, I'm witnessing it. It's part of me, it's part of my experience, but I'm actually bigger than it because I'm witnessing it.
Beautiful.
And that's that's what I see. I'm sure you read the little mimer in maybe it's Derech HaMelech or Eish Kodesh from the Piazetzner Rebbe about Inyan Hashkata. How do you acquire a
Quieting the
quiet
mind.
and wild mind? And he talks about just recognizing the emotion that it's there,
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
not getting sucked into the whirlpool, but just recognizing it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. We're getting to the end of the hour.
Yeah,
Um, powerful words, and I think just by bringing this awareness, people will get healing over the world. What you're doing, and
I hope so.
keep up.
Yeah,
Definitely, that's the purpose. I think both of our purposes is that.
yeah, sure
And
enough.
I'm going to put in the bottom of the video, but if you want to just say how people can contact you, the best
Sure.
way.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's three main things I do, and one of them is online education, and a lot of it's free. And so I have a blog that's just my name. You can look up drshiller.com. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm writing a lot and doing more videos about this interface of Torah, healing, and medicine, and
Yeah,
really in general, higher consciousness, healing, and medicine. Because I just love that, like I was talking at the beginning. And that's at healing.drshiller.com. And so the way people that I work with people, it can be like in a integrative or functional medicine consultation, and that can be around pain or chronic illness and inflammatory stuff, digestive, depression, anxiety, and all sorts of stuff like that, where we work on that three M's model and that transcendent model as well. And then for people who really want to dive into the one-on-one coaching who are dealing with some sort of health crisis, that's what I do in this sort of one-on-one soul-powered coaching program that is really great
great.
fun and very
Again,
transformative.
I'm going to put in the bottom of the video your
Yeah.
contact and everything. And
Thank you.
thank you for being here with us. And
Thank you.
hopefully we can do this again, take it to
Yeah.
the next level.
Yeah,
But
sure.
really appreciate you being here and inspiring all of us.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you
I
for being
appreciate
here.
you being here and like creating a space where these conversations can happen. It's a lot of work and you're putting a lot of work into it. And I know that you've also got a really big skill base and you're helping a lot of people with Mendy. So
Thank you.
uh, you should have bracha and hatzlacha and lots of
Amen. Amen.
strength in doing that. So keep up the great
Great,
work.
great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.